Hello everyone, my name is Tony Bulmer. I'm a presentation skills coach and content strategy advisor. And welcome to my session, Connecting as a Leader in a New World. Thank you very much for investing your time. It's a pleasure to be with you here in my office here in Sydney. It's the inner sanctum of my world. So thank you for joining me. And thank you to NEC. In fact, congratulations to NEC for hosting what is in itself a new event in a different environment and giving us all the opportunity to communicate and connect in a way that perhaps we wouldn't have previously. Most of you perhaps have already listened and watched Mike Walsh. What a wonderful speaker he is, what a wonderful mind he is, and if you haven't seen him, please do. Fantastic. One very interesting comment that he made that I wanted to pick up on was the opportunity to be better and stronger out of challenging environments and challenging times. We don't always think that that's going to be the case. We're often, as we are at the moment, dealing with lots of challenge, lots of change, and we probably haven't landed on what the new world actually looks like yet. But there is an opportunity for us to be better and stronger, and specifically from my point of view, I would hope from a communication perspective. And that's what I want to explore with you in this session. I want to talk about two things really. I want to talk about the challenges that truly are in play for us as leaders and communicators today and going forward, in order to then look at, well, what might better and stronger be? What does better and stronger look like? What are the solutions to being better and stronger? We're going to talk about both those things. So challenges. Virtual is one. It's a great opportunity, don't get me wrong. The fact that I'm able to communicate with you now, how wonderful is that? But it is still a challenge. The word virtual actually by definition means almost. And so it's not quite the same as being in a room with people. I think there are some very definite upsides, but it almost nearly. Now, as a leader, we can't be nearly, we can't be almost in our communication and in our connection with people. There's no room for nearlies. The other issue with virtual is there is a fatigue in play, and many of you would know this already. I mean, I'm talking to clients all the time and they're just exhausted from screen time. In the business sense, and of course we also spend a lot of time on screens in our personal world. So to actually engage and truly connect through screens and through virtual, you've got to really put some effort in. It has to be done in a particular way, which I'll talk to. I want to talk about a different fatigue, and I'm being a little bit cute here. I call it sanitization fatigue, and I don't mean in relation to COVID. I mean in a different way. I think we're seeing globally, by way of audiences watching politicians, audiences looking at business leaders, and actually tuning out from them because of what I describe as navy suits, white shirts, presenters, leaders delivering speeches that in fact in many cases they haven't written themselves, and worst case they're then reading in delivery. Now that is not connecting. That is not connecting with an audience. Might be word perfect, but it's not connecting. The third challenge, I would say, is going to date me, because many of you probably haven't heard this song, but in the late 70s there was a song called "Video Killed the Radio Star." I won't sing it for you, you don't deserve that. And I mean that nicely to you. But I think PowerPoint has gone a long way to killing off a lot of presenters, because I think it's made a lot of presenters really quite lazy. I still see today a lot of presenters, be it in the flesh or be it virtually, senior leaders thinking that by just putting up 30 slides, they're communicating effectively. When in reality, again, I'm going to use one particular word, that is not what I call connecting with an audience. So I'm not delivering all good news here. There are some real challenges that I think to be able to connect, you've got to understand that they exist, and more importantly, we've got to be able to conquer them. Remember Mike Walsh, stronger, better. The good news at the moment, the good news is I think audiences and people generally, from politicians, from business leaders, they want to be led more than ever. That's what happens when times are challenging. People want leadership. So there's the opportunity. It's a matter of being able to connect with them in a way that, as a leader, you're heard. So, there are challenges, know them, let's go after them. So what are the solutions? Well, I'm going to talk about 4. I'm going to talk about, firstly, having a clear story in your mind. Then I'm going to secondly talk about bold versus unbold. I'm going to make sense of that comment. I want to talk about presence, both physically and emotional presence. And then fourthly, I want to talk about keeping it real. So being clear in your own mind with the story you want to tell. I'm going to give an example here, and I don't normally give this sort of example, but I want to reference the Australian Prime Minister, Mr. Scott Morrison. And I've got to say to you that my own view is I think he's done, and his government has done, a tremendous job in dealing with unprecedented challenge, okay? So I'm not making political commentary here, but I am going to reference a communication example. Early in the COVID process, he did a telecast to the nation on a Sunday evening. Now, 2 challenges with Sunday evening. One, I was tired. I mean, at the end of the week, it had been a particularly busy weekend, and I was just weary. And it probably isn't the perfect time for me to want to process rather heavy content, if you like. The second, I think, issue with that was I think he was tired, and understandably, I mean, and still probably is. I mean, all leaders are working under very difficult circumstances. The issue is this. He presented for, I think, 45 minutes or so, pertinent information. We wanted an update. But it came across as just a list of disparate points. There didn't seem to be any cohesive story that was easy to digest. So I think if he tackled it differently, and this requires thought in his own mind, to have said to us up front, look, I want to talk about 3 issues. I want to talk about COVID in terms of what we know at this point, to give you an update on that. I then want to talk to you about our health strategy, and I want to talk about our economic strategy. Now, I'm not being particularly clever because, in fact, everything he did cover could have sat under one of those 3 headings. But the point is to package up content so that there seems to be a story, a flow. Now, that's part of the solution with clarity in your own mind. The other piece that I see lacking all the time with presenters, even at the most senior level, is to have what I call endpoints. And what I mean by that is simply to be able to hear yourself saying at the end of any chunk, very sophisticated language I use, to be able to get to the end of a section and say, look, so in terms of our update on COVID, in terms of what we know about COVID at the moment, the very simple point I would make is, and to clearly extract out or isolate a key point for the audience to take away. I call these mini conclusions. Now, my point about clarity in your mind is that any communication as a leader, 5 minutes, an hour, longer, one-on-one, 1-on-100, I want you to be able to sit at your desk or somewhere beforehand and think to yourself, okay, I've got a lot to cover, but really there's 3 things, there's 4 things I'm covering, some sort of number like that, and I want you to be able to really encapsulate in your own mind the point to each section. That is clarity of mind for you. The real point there is you need to plan that clarity. You can't just wing that. You've got to plan that clarity. Now, in delivery, audiences hear a lot of information. They generally don't need to remember it all. They need to understand a lot of it, but they don't need to normally retain it all. But for them to retain the key points that you want them to, you need to help them. It's interesting, in our written word, we are completely comfortable and practiced, if you like, with punctuation, with emails, even with text. There's an element of indentation for paragraphing. There's an element of certain words being put in brackets to indicate it's an aside comment. We understand the difference between an exclamation mark and a full stop. and bolding, unbolding, and I would say that in a lot of verbal communication, almost most verbal communication that I hear, there's no distinction between unbold and bold. And so every point seems to feel for the listener as though it's as equal importance to all other points. Now, audiences can't take that away. So I'm often talking to my clients about the concept of emphasis, and I literally talk about unbold and bold. So for me, for example, and this doesn't make me right or wrong, but my natural state is probably more bold. I'm loud, I'm animated often, I'm energetic. And so for me, my state of emphasis, and this is kind of like the 95 and 5, my state of emphasis, say for a mini conclusion, might actually be, look, folks, the point I really want to stress here in terms of what we know about COVID, and it's via a pause, to deliver it quietly, perhaps to be more static and still in delivering it, even sit versus stand perhaps. But it's simply about delivering a key point differently. Even what I call warning words, to say words like, look, there's a lot of information there, but the point I really want to highlight. Audiences love that. There's a sense of, oh, I better listen to this. Now, whether your natural state is unbold and you emphasize by being bold, or your natural state is bold, if you're crazy and weird like me, and you emphasize by being unbold, it doesn't matter. What matters is there's clear difference for the listener. So, my point is you need to physically highlight your key points for your listeners. Now, in a similar vein, let's talk about the concept of presence. And if you remember, I said up front, I want to talk about physical presence, but I also want to talk about a thing called emotional presence. So physical presence, in a sense, is, people often think about presence as you're either born with it or you're not. And I actually don't subscribe to that. I think we can all have presence. We have to have presence because presence is about being noticed. And I'd actually say to you that in a virtual sense, in a virtual setting, you probably have to be even a bit bigger. It's like performing on a small stage in front of 100 people versus performing on a large stage in front of 10,000 people. You've almost got to exaggerate to really be able to connect. So physical presence really is about movement and using space. Now, for that to happen, there needs to be a sense of purpose to it. I'm not suggesting that we just can move around any strange old way. One really easy way is to think about movement as a way of separating content. So for example, very simple example, we might talk about pre-COVID. We can talk about the way our business was or the environment was that we were working in. We can talk about where are we at this moment. More importantly though, we can talk about, well, where are we needing to be and how do we need to look as a business in 12 months' time. Now, I'm obviously making up the content, but it's a great way to use space to separate and add clarity. Now, of course, you can do this sitting down. You can just do this, sitting at a desk using your hands. But it's just an interesting way of you becoming physically active in your own discussion and your own content. In relevance to, again, virtual, I'm coming back to virtual because it's a huge part of your world at the moment, as you know. I'm concerned that so many people are sitting right on their laptop screen when communicating. And what they're doing is they're shrinking their stage. And so there's no scope for movement. So I would suggest generally that we create a little bit of space within reason such that you can have opportunity to move and to create this physical clarity. So I want to talk about emotional presence. And I often call this emotional alignment. And the word alignment is very, very important here. So what I mean by this is, I think there should be a difference in the physical demeanor of a presenter, a leader, anyone, when discussing bad news to good news, or when discussing challenges versus solutions. Because challenges are challenges, they're serious, right? And we've all got challenges on our plate at the moment. All of you have challenges on your plates at the moment. And that's not to be laughed at. But if we're talking about solutions that we really believe in, then there's an ability to and a responsibility to in fact demonstrate and convey a positive sentiment with that, particularly if you're talking about strategies and solutions that you've seen work in other contexts. So you know they've got form, if you like. Now, I actively listen to a lot of presenters and a lot of leaders where I'm often sitting there, I'm actively listening, I'm being paid to listen, not as much as you might think, but I'm often still sitting there thinking, I'm not sure, is this person saying to us we've got a problem or not? I can't tell, because there's no alignment with their demeanour. Now, alignment, it's such an important word because this is not acting. This is not acting. This is about sitting down at our desk or wherever beforehand, days beforehand, and thinking, okay, I've got a lot to cover off on Friday or whenever in this presentation. I'm updating people on the, where we're at. But to think, okay, I am delivering some challenging news. I am reminding them that we've got some headwinds to deal with. But I'm also talking to them about some very positive aspects of how we can deal with this. And it's getting in sync and reflecting that. So my point to you is that you, as a leader, need to be physically and emotionally connected to your content to add to clarity. The last idea is keep it real. Now, what does that mean? Well, we are changing. It is a new world. And people are working more remotely. Some people perhaps aren't enjoying that. Many are. With that's come a further decrease in formality. It had already started to happen over many years, but there's a further decrease in formality, even just the way we dress. And I think you'll find some people are questioning whether or not that needs to change back the other way. They're pretty comfy. Doesn't seem to affect workloads at all. In fact, I think people are working harder than ever at the moment. So keeping it real, what does it mean? Well, it might mean, firstly, I'll give you a couple of examples. One is your environment. There are different views on this, but some views are that with home office situations that they should be made to look as professional and as formal or business-like as possible. I don't know. I'll give you an example. I had a screen meeting with 3 finance executives a couple of weeks ago. I hadn't met any of them prior, and we were to have a serious discussion. When I went on screen online, one person was already in the meeting. And there he was sitting in his home office environment. And behind him, or to one side, were these extraordinary large, and I mean large, weights, as in gym weights, right? And his first words to me were, "Tony, good morning, how are you?" I don't know this man. My immediate words were, "Stephen, I am completely intimidated by the weights that are beside you." And we had a jolly conversation for 3-4 minutes about weights and exercise and my pathetic exercise regime and what have you. But of course, we had wonderful rapport. Wasn't planned, but that environment facilitated that conversation. I was actually having a conversation with a woman in Indonesia a few weeks ago. It was our second meeting. She had to move from where she was sitting at her desk at home because her husband was also working from home in the crazy world that we're in, and there was a bit too much noise. And so she moved, and she felt a bit embarrassed, I think, about having to disrupt the meeting. So she picked up her laptop and she ultimately sat down, and she sat down in a spot that she obviously hadn't really planned to, but in front of these extraordinary large double oak doors that in fact were her entrance to her apartment, or the entrance to her apartment. And they were extraordinary. And I said to her, "Ronnie, we can't talk about our business for a moment. I need to understand these doors. These doors are extraordinary." We had a wonderful conversation. And in fact, the sense of rapport dramatically heightened. We'd only met one meeting prior, and suddenly we were having a much more human connection. So let your environment give a bit about you, about your world, because it actually might help you connect. And I'm going back to that wonderful word, because that's what we're talking about here today. How do we connect with people? The other thought for connecting is by way of the idea of analogies. Now, analogies are not new to you. Why are analogies useful in communication generally? Well, they're fantastic tools to perhaps take somewhat complicated content and distill it into a simpler form that people can grasp and easily relate to. They're often interesting. They're often memorable too. I often call them sticky. People remember analogies. But there's something else about an analogy in the sense that it can be a great way to connect and be a bit more human with an audience, depending on the source of the analogy. So An exercise I do a lot with my clients is I ask them to build out their personal library. And all that means is to write down 4 or 5 things, interests that they have that are outside of work. And I often suggest that they try and identify at least a couple that, for no issue of secrecy or privacy, aren't all that well known by their constituents, their peers, their colleagues, their clients, etc. Now, it might be as simple as mountain biking, although if you're like me, and I came off a mountain bike about 4 weeks ago now, and this is what I look like the day after. So you possibly don't, I'm not going to talk about mountain biking, that's for sure, but it might be mountain biking, it might be traveling, it might be cooking, but you're an exotic curry, chef, or just something that you're passionate about. In my case, I'm a live music fan, so it's often a source of analogy for me. Now, how do you do this in a meaningful way? You're possibly sitting there thinking, that's great, but we've got to have some very serious conversations with audiences at the moment. I get you. So we've talked about structure already today. Here's another structure. And this is old. And this is by a gentleman called Dale Carnegie. Many of you will have heard of him from some years ago now. And he came up with this wonderful structure for telling stories in any conversation. And it's called IPB. And you don't have to use these exact words, but here's how it might work. So imagine you're mid-conversation, business conversation, sitting in a boardroom, standing in front of people, virtually, doesn't matter. And you might just say to your audience, look, let me come at this from a different perspective. Some of you may not know this, but I'm a live music fan. I love going to concerts, which is pretty difficult to do, of course, in a COVID world at the moment, but I love seeing live performances, but I actually collect live albums, have done for years. 90% of my collection is live performances. There's the I. It's what's called the incident. I stands for incident. You don't have to use that language, but that's what it is. P is the point. The point about live music, from my selfish point of view, is one, most live albums are basically greatest hits albums because performers play the things that the music that people want to hear. But the other thing, the point about live music is there's usually something different. It might be that there's an acoustic version of a song that was heavily instrumentalized when it was first released, or it might be a guest performer. I'm showing my age here. Elton John has many live albums. One of my favorites is a double live album, came out on vinyl many years ago, called Here and There. And here was Royal Albert Hall in London, and there was Madison Square Gardens. When they re-released it onto CD, it featured the 3 tracks that are the last ever live performance of John Lennon. And it's wonderful. It wasn't wonderful musically because they were both completely off their faces. I hope no lawyers will come after me for saying that, but Elton has acknowledged that. But it's still a magical moment. So the point is, in regard to live music, there's always something different. Now, IPB, B stands for benefit or relevance. Folks, the relevance of doing things differently to us here today in the business environment, and there's your connection. There's your link back to your business content. It's like a punchline of a joke, if you like, although it's not meant to be necessarily funny. Probably isn't. So there's a wonderful opportunity where you can use analogies to add clarity and benefit that any analogy does, but in a way that gives an audience a bit more of an insight regarding yourself. And I often say to leaders, and I know this might sound contrived, but I often say, try and give your audiences something about you that they wouldn't have otherwise have known. That is going to deepen connection. My point about keeping it real is, regardless of your content, think about your environment, think about how your environment, and think about how your content, perhaps your personal content, can play a role to actually communicate and, more importantly, connect with the people. So there are 4 ideas for you. Let's go back. Firstly, have clarity in your own mind. You've got to plan this. You've got to create this clarity cemented in your own mind before you ever walk into the room in order to add value to anyone. Secondly, make it easy for them to understand which points are the key points. At 95 and 5, they're not going to remember 95% of it, but Make sure that they take away the 5% that you want them to. So be aware of bold versus unbold. Thirdly, we talked about presence and your physical presence, but also importantly, your emotional presence. And the need to be in sync with what you're saying. Is it bad news? Is it good news? You need to be connected to your content in order for you to then connect for your audience. And fourthly, I'm very simply saying, in today's world, keep it real. Be real. That's where you can engage, and that's where trust comes. People want to get to know you. They need to know you. They want to understand who you are, not just your content. So I hope that's been of value to you. And again, thank you for investing the time with me. If you'd like to talk to me, if you're watching this live on the 22nd of July, I'm going to be in the NEC Immersion Plus networking room later this afternoon for an hour between 4 and 5. And I'd be more than thrilled to chat with you online. If you'd like to contact me going forward, I do a lot of coaching. I do virtual coaching, of course, in the world we're in. I'm doing a lot of that, so I'm doing it across all geographical borders, not just here in Australia, and I can also do in the flesh. I do one-on-ones, I do group coaching. Additionally, I've just released a 2-hour training video program that is a great way to reassess and further develop your presentation skills impact. Please reach out to me. My details are on screen. Contact me by email. Check my website if you haven't already. Very happy to help you and your people going forward. I want to go back to where I started. There's an opportunity here, and Mike Walsh said this, to be stronger and better. I also said to you, people want to be led. They really want your leadership. So my suggestion to you is make the effort. Take time, put the effort in to really ensure that you connect deeply with people. Because that's what it takes for people to listen, to actually go away and process and consider. And that then gives you a tremendous opportunity for those people to follow you. Thank you very much, and all the best to you all.